what attracted you to this story?
I had for years been thinking I really wanted to make a film about contemporary China. We've seen films come out of China, and many are very good, but most of them do nothing to advance the understanding of what China's like today. So, you know, people flying around in robes and whatnot is not the China that I've experienced in recent years. And I have been traveling there quite a bit, and even recently, even though there's so much news about China in the press, people's understanding seems to be very shallow. And I just thought perhaps it's because films don't actually give you that deeper insight that they often can. And I really wanted to show a China that was actually much more colorful and much more human than one often sees. And then Daniel Shaw found me with this idea and a script that he had been working on because he had a similar point of view about it, and we decided to collaborate.
I heard that when he brought you the script, there was actually a lot of kind of work that you guys did together to kind of nail down the story in a way that, you know, could like, you know.
I think I know what you're saying.
Sorry.
Daniel has a comedy background. He worked in TV comedy and is a really talented writer. I felt it was really important that this film be authentic, if not enjoyable. I mean, ideally enjoyable and authentic to a Chinese audience as well as a Western audience, not only for the purposes of trying to get money out of China, which was also a factor, but also because I was really convinced that given what Chinese audiences are like today, which is that they're very hungry for all kinds of material and have seen every film, and especially American films, that it was possible to make a film that would be pleasing to them as well as to American audiences. So I definitely put my radar out in terms of like what might seem offensive. You know, where were there jokes taken at the offense, you know, or at the, you know, at the what's the word? I can't remember the word. At the whatever the there's a word I can't. It's a really simple word. Expense. There it is. Jesus Christ. But, so at the expense of Chinese, and that wasn't necessary. You know, there's a lot of examples I could give. Recently I was reminded, one of them was when Sam arrived at his new apartment, there was a squat toilet in it. Squat toilets can be very funny, and he had his whole scene where he was falling into the squat toilet and whatnot. And it was funny, but at the same time, it was totally unrealistic that a fancy Wall Street law firm would put him in such an apartment when there are so many amazing apartments there, you know. So I just thought, well, you're going to lose the credibility for the Chinese audience because, you know, why would anybody contemplate putting him in that kind of apartment? So we just did a lot of work on this front, and he always found good solutions. I never gave him solutions. I always said, what about this? Or why not? Originally the gadget was something else. I said, make it more modern. You know, I wanted the China that was represented in the early drafts to me felt a little bit old, and I specifically wanted to not basically perpetuate older stereotypes, but show the China as it is today. So that was the work that we did for quite a few months, and I think we found great solutions in every case.
So you're kind of known as the go-to person for, you know, when people want to do a film and try to market it to both Chinese audiences and American audiences. So for this being a comedy, were there discussions about, you know, Chinese humor versus American humor and kind of how to...
Yeah, there were many discussions. You know, the script was vetted many times on both sides of the Pacific, again and again. And we knew that there would be certain things that would be perhaps funnier to Chinese audience and others to a Western audience. There were a few things we thought might be a little sensitive to Chinese. For instance, when Sam is first told that he's being sent to China, and then you see his imagination of a peasant with a chicken, you know. But we felt like we could push the envelope a little bit, not so far that it would turn people off, but that the nature, you know, one thing I really like about Daniel that it really suits me is that everyone's pretty likable. You don't have to make people really repulsive, you know, to be funny. they can still be likable. He's, you know, it's hard not to like Daniel Henney, even though he's a bit of a jerk in the beginning. But he comes around. So it's it was meant to be, again, something that people could appreciate, you know, whoever they were. And while there might be places that would cause people to go, wait, are they, you know, are they making fun of us? But you know that the overall intention of the movie is really to make fun of a situation more than anything, not any one person per se.
So I'm sure a lot of people here have seen Daniel Henney before, but some might be seeing him for the first time. So can you talk a little about why you wanted Daniel Henney for the lead role?
I should hope that would be obvious, having seen it. We saw him, and he was the one. I mean, we had seen a lot of people, and you know, they're very good actors, and our Chinese partners, of course, encouraged us to meet a lot of the Chinese actor or American-born Chinese actors who are quite well known in China. We could have gotten maybe a little more star value from the Chinese perspective with some other actors. But once we saw Daniel Henney, I was particularly convinced. I said, this has got to be the guy. He is, you know, we were talking outside before, and I said, it's terrible. I never talk about actors this way. I usually don't objectify them in this way. But he's just like this incredible specimen of a human being. He happens to be an amazing actor, too. So, go figure. You know, this comes along just rarely, and you know, and he is appealing to, as far as I can tell, all sexes, all ages, and all proclivities.
We were talking about this outside, and I was saying the same thing. I don't usually do that, but I feel like when we're talking about him being good looking, we're just stating facts. You
didn't say that. You said hot. Okay.
That is correct.
It's a fact. He is hot.
So I know, like even though he's done a lot of films and television in Korea, he hadn't actually had a chance to do comedy before. So was that one of the factors that you were?
Well, that was the factor that we were concerned about. And then after the audition, we couldn't believe how funny was his timing, and also his ability to take direction. Our audition with him ended up going on quite some time because we were so intrigued how far we could go with him. And Daniel, you know, was playing with him a lot and saying, "What about this?" and "Try this," and he just blew us away. And then, but we still felt like we had to consult with our partners and with other people. It's hard to tie the knot with someone so quickly. So we took footage of the audition tape to China, and again, we were a little bit worried that they would still be pushing for some other people that had bigger names in China. But they took one look at him and were also convinced on the spot. So that was an easy sell.
So I know you were actually on the set for a lot of the shoots. So can you talk a little bit about, you said every day. Can you talk a little about how long was the shoot and did it?
Yeah, you know, sometimes I don't think this is the crowd that would have to ask this, but I'm often asked, what does a producer do? And you know, what do you, besides you throw money at it or what? And so you probably all know that actually a producer can do a lot of different things or cannot do a lot of things, as the case may be. But I come from the school where I do a lot of things. In other words, whatever it takes to get the movie made. And I think with this project, it really required someone who could be not just bilingual, but bicultural. You know, we had Western actors that had never been to China before. We had crew that had never worked on a co-production before. There were just so many. There's 2 different working styles, at least 2, if not more. So many factors that were in the mix. It was really an experiment. I guess that's, for me, part of the thrill. There was, you know, every movie is different anyway, but you bring elements together and it creates its own stew. And this one, I like to say, because this has been my experience, that every film I've worked on, the very themes of the movie are what you're experiencing in the making of the film. So all this sort of cross-cultural stuff, this is happening on set every day. We're always laughing about one thing or another, or getting frustrated because we couldn't get one side to explain this or that. And so it was particularly rewarding for that reason. And it was fun. You know, I shot in China 5 different times. The first time was in the 1980s, working with Steven Spielberg on Empire of the Sun. You can imagine China was a very, very different place then. And we were shooting in Shanghai. I've shot in Shanghai actually 4 times now. And each time has been very different, especially comparing it back then and today. Back then, everything was government controlled, and we had hired all our crew through the film studio, the Shanghai Film Studio, which is our partner. These days, you are very free to construct your crew the way you wish. Most of the really good crew members are independent contractors. You just pick the best, very much like it is here. And the good news and the bad news is that things aren't centrally controlled. So if you want to block off a street, you don't get the higher authorities to just do that for you. You have to go to every individual proprietor and say, by the way, how about, letting us blah, blah, blah. So it's, in some ways, it's more difficult. In Empire of the Sun, we had 5,000 extras, because back then we didn't use special effects, visual effects to do that kind of thing. So, there's more work to be done on the one hand, but you have more control over your production. So this film was truly a co-production. We brought over a DP, an editor, and an accountant, and that's it. Everybody else was hired in China, and we were always looking for good bilingual crew. For instance, we had a fantastic interpreter for the camera department who knew all the technical terms for camera equipment. And we had a bilingual AD and whatnot. So you try to find people that are really able to contribute to this kind of production. And we shot for 30 days, and we shot all over the city, as you can tell, and no sets, no built sets, all location shooting, which made things really interesting sometimes, because weather and whatnot. You have all this. We never had the backup plan. We had the office that was our backup, and it was it was really a lot of touch and go, but we did it with just a lot of love and enthusiasm, and so I'm still smiling today. I can still watch this film and smile and think about the memories.
Yeah, it seems like you not only had Daniel Henney, but you had like a great ensemble cast. Can you talk about? I mean, you have like big Hollywood actors.
Well, we knew we had to try to throw some of those in, satisfy those people who decide the fate of movies. And we were very fortunate, I would say, so Bill Paxton actually was somebody I thought of, and I happened to see him at this event, and one thing led to another. Alan Ruck was Daniel's Eddie Lezick. We had a completely different actress in mind for the Amanda character, and then at the last minute she got a role next to Tom Cruise in that musical, and she's probably regretting that she took that film. But so we had to find somebody in a hurry. It was really freaky. We were 2 weeks away from shooting, and she obviously felt very bad, and Eliza Coop's name came up, and she literally picked up the script. She would tell the story. She read 12 pages, said, I'm in. And she's not that, she's a TV actress primarily, and she usually doesn't travel that far. And this is like a really big deal. So there she was, and then she had to learn Chinese in 2 weeks. Imagine. But she did such a great job. I've heard people debate after screenings, especially when we had them in China. It's like, yeah, she must be. She's fluent in Chinese. She probably lives in China. So she was pretty persuasive. And then all the other actors were hired in China. That was a big surprise. We had a wonderful casting director who's worked on a lot of the co-productions in China, everything from Forbidden Kingdom to Karate Kid, whatever. So she's really adept at hiring or finding Chinese actors who can speak English, and also Western actors who can speak Chinese. She's worked a lot there, and we found so many good Western actors living in Beijing and Shanghai, working very happily and busy. They're there because they're busier there than they think they would be here. So while we think of China as offering a lot of opportunities to people for manufacturing and whatnot, we don't think about actors moving to China, but they do.
You mentioned that Chinese audiences seeing the film. I know that the film is opening today in San Francisco, right? And then next week.
And that is why Daniel Shaw is not here. And I'm sorry, because he did go to USC Film School. He didn't graduate. He decided to go take a job in TV instead. And I'm sorry, Daniel Henney couldn't be here because she's doing press. I know, it's just little me, not the two handsome Daniels. But it was just been a, everything, I just decided, the older I get, I have to say, I love just breaking rules because the rules don't work anyway. And we had this opportunity to screen the film in San Francisco with the mayor hosting it. We just had this amazing screening at the Lucasfilm gorgeous cinema, as gorgeous as this. This is very gorgeous too. And also, thank you, George. And it just for various reasons, the theater that we wanted to be in there and whatnot. So oddly, we opened in San Francisco 1 week earlier than New York and LA, and we thought, well, maybe it's just a positive thing because New York and LA are tougher markets, and it would give the film more time to get word of mouth spread around town and whatnot. So yes, it opened. I have to talk to Daniel later today and find out. He's doing a Q&A right now at the Presidio Theater on Chestnut Street in San Francisco. We open, I must remember to tell you these things so you can tell your friends. We are at the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. It's now called officially the TCL Chinese Theater, in case you haven't heard. It was, the naming rights were bought by a big Chinese electronics firm. And we are also opening at the Lemley's 7, Pasadena 7, in Pasadena, obviously, next Friday. So please do, I'm being a little flip about it. It's such a, Dan and I met 3 years ago, and here we are promoting the film. It's always a long haul, and thank God we both loved the process because it would be really hard otherwise. But if you like the film, please do tell your friends and post it on, all those sites that my assistants forced me to go on to now, and no, I'm doing it. I am blogging and everything. But yeah, do spread the word because it's been very gratifying. I think audiences have mostly really, really enjoyed the film, so you won't be doing them a disservice to recommend it.
Great, I think we can open it up to questions from the audience. Yeah.
Has this film been shown in China?
The film was shown in China. It was in the Shanghai International Film Festival last June. We won 2 awards for both Daniel Shaw and Daniel Henney, and it was really wonderful. And then, for better or for worse, our Chinese distributor, China Film Group, decided therefore to rush the film out in the summer without having done any preparation. So I can't say the box office was huge, but it got great notice and a lot of, really positive response. And people are talking about apparently it's selling like hotcakes in the video stores, legally.
Hi, Janet. It's my second screening, and it's great, so congratulations. I meant to ask you this question at the U.S.-China Film Summit at UCLA. How'd you end up in the film?
Well, because
you were playing yourself too. That's the most difficult acting
Daniel
job.
surprised me by throwing in that Janet line. He wrote a new line for Bill Paxton, and so he actually names me. But of course, you do everything you can to save money, and one of the ways to save money is not to pay extras, and one of the ways to not have to pay extras is to have your crew and various other people get in the film. So I saved the production at least $15 that day.
A true producer, yeah.
I was very frustrated though because we were sitting there all day and I was like, I have other things to do than just sit here. But anyway, I suffered through it.
As you mentioned, you said a lot of co-production films between the U.S. and China. For Forbidden Kingdom. What's like ancient China? So obviously your film Shanghai Calling was more of like a modern film of modern China. Do you think this will start a trend of more co-production films coming in as just not ancient China but just modern China and Shanghai, Beijing, and these skyscrapers and all that?
If all of you tell your friends and they tell all of their friends and this movie is successful, yes. It's as simple as that. It takes some people who are very foolish like myself to do things that aren't yet completely proven. I can't tell you how many naysayers there were. But then there were so many naysayers for Joy Luck Club and for other movies I worked on. So, that's what I'm saying. There's really no guarantees ever, so you might as well do something that you believe in and just hope that you find the support that will then prove your case. Fortunately, this movie didn't cost a whole lot of money, so we'll be okay. But if it really does make a splash, then yes. And if you think there should be more movies about contemporary China, let this be an example.
Hi, I want to thank you for the opportunity so that we can all see this movie. I've been wanting to see it, so I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to come and check out the movie. It's really, really funny and really, really good. And I have a question. What is the challenge for you to make movie in China? Because, why not other place? Why China? Obviously the storyline is about Chinese and American. And also, is there any incentive from the government for you to make movie there? Because as you know, China is very government control over there. And what are the incentives that they give for people, the Hollywood director, producer want to make movie over there? Thank you.
Most people say there's disincentives to make movies there. They don't incur, there's no tax breaks or anything, because most people don't pay taxes anyway, but I want to make movies in China because I feel it's something that I can do that's different from what most people can do, because I have been kind of living in this weird, straddled place for so long, and I feel that I find stories that are inspiring me, and lately a lot of people want to make movies in China because of the box office that is growing by leaps and bounds. So there's a new rush of people who see big dollar signs, and there may very well be such dollars going into their pockets. It's not clear, but certainly the big Hollywood movies are grossing a lot, and the reason for co-productions for the studios is that if you are a co-production, then you are distributed as a Chinese movie in China, which means that, number one, you can open during Chinese holidays when other Western movies are banned, and also you get a much more favorable box office split. So in that way, there's a huge incentive to make movies in China from the standpoint of the studios, because otherwise they're just getting a smaller piece of the pie. But that is not my primary incentive. It's a factor. I was kicking around China when there was no discussion of money to be made. It just was an interesting place for me. And a lot of my friends have had this similar experience, and we're all kind of going, wow, this is kind of great and crazy that now everybody wants to do it. It's wonderful because there is genuine need to understand Chinese culture and Chinese taste and what Chinese audiences want to see. So from that standpoint, I'm thrilled.
Loved your film. For the sake of understanding the production values and the cost of doing business in China, what was the cost of full deliverables on this film?
It was 2.6 and some.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. You mentioned Western actors are working a lot in China. What about Chinese actors working in China? Chinese American actors working in China?
Chinese American as well. The people that I was referring to, there's quite a few. Daniel Wu and Wang Lihong and Stanley Huang and Nicholas Tay. They're most of them actually are American born, so they're better known in China than they are here. I think that this is just a theory that I was kind of tossing around in my head. It may be that particularly for Asian, Russell Wong is there, and it may be that particularly for Asian American male actors, China has offered more opportunities, because I think it's really hard for them here. And there they can be heroic and macho and everything that guys want to be. And so that's just a half-baked theory, but I think there might be something to it.
Not to bring it back to Daniel Henney, but that's kind of Daniel Henney's story, right? Even for Korea.
That's right. It is Daniel Henney's story. Daniel Henney just made another film in China, though, too, that I'm involved with a filmmaker named Jean Meng, Eva Jin. Hi, Stanley.
Hi.
The Chinese authorities have not been particularly happy with the co-productions, and they've been quite vocal about it. Things like, even a film like Looper, which, at least in the international version, it could have been made anywhere. They threw in some Shanghai scenes with Bruce Willis, but it doesn't really need to be in the film. And you also see Michael Seepley and others writing in the New York Times about the vetting that takes place, even with Chinese officials on the set on some of these, to make sure that China's treated. You yourself talked about the problems with the new Karate Kid, for example, in some of the summits that we've had. So I wonder, how active was the Chinese side, in co-production side, in vetting anything you were doing or consulting on what you were doing?
There's always the process, meaning that you have to submit your script. There's two basic bumps in the road. One is you submit your script and you sit around nervously, like what are the notes that are going to come back, and then you submit your film. And sometimes there's a lot of back and forth. Our process was not, I would say, not surprisingly smooth. I mean, it was because I kind of did a lot of the vetting. I mean, I just knew, first of all, that, you know, there's a definite no-nos for China, and then there's a big gray area, and then there's things that you feel, oh, there really shouldn't be anything wrong with this. So I tried to, you know, there was definitely never any big no-nos, and then there were some gray areas, and I tried to kind of smooth those out a little bit. We got some comments from China Film Group before they even sent it upstairs. Some of those had to do with the notion that as you're watching the film, one believes, I think, unless you know the ending, that the Chinese are pirating the film. And they were a little uncomfortable because they said, oh God, you think for most of the time that they really are pirating, and what is this going to mean? I said, but again, you know they're not. And so we kind of got over that hurdle. And there were a few other little things here and there. They made I have to go back because there were so few comments. They didn't make us undo the structure of the film at all. There were just little things that we could get around. So they gave us their anticipated comments, which we addressed, and then by the time we sent it to co-film production, they just approved it. They approved it. That means you get your shooting permit. They made some comments. They basically said, be careful of this and this. And I can't remember, unfortunately, what those are, because I was just asked this question in San Francisco, and I should have gone back and looked at that note. But then we submitted the film, and the only thing they asked us to do, they basically gave us the distribution permit on the side, but they said, try to shorten the chase of the workers. In the very beginning, you see the workers chasing Sam, and you don't know why. So they said, shorten that, which was no biggie. We took out a couple of seconds. And they, again, I think they didn't want to leave sort of any lasting impressions that there was some bad behavior going on. And so I felt pretty confident that this was going to be okay, that it would be safe, more or less. You know, we had to do a few things here and there. And it turned out to be actually, on that level, a very smooth process. There was no other interference, no other changes, no other anything along the way. So I was glad about that, because I can understand why people get intimidated by the process, but it's not that different from submitting your film to a studio here, where you are, you know, assuming there will be lots of comments and that they don't know what the hell they're talking about and why they're making us change it and wrong, you know. So it's, I have done some hand-holding for others as they go through it. Yeah.
How did you get your startup funding, and then did you actually bank fund, or was that through co-production where money came from both sides?
Money came from both sides. Yes, there were some initial private investors here, and then we got the remainder from China. So we had talked to a couple of different companies in China and landed with China Film Group. There was another company that we were talking to as well, and then they trained some personnel, and then decided to go with China Film Group.
So was it like a 50-50 split of American money in China?
Not quite, but not too far away from that.
Yeah.
After you've done this, do you think it's a worthwhile experience overall, and have you think about doing something similar again in the future?
Yes, I do plan to make some more films in China, co-productions. I have a couple of projects that I'm very excited about. Yeah, because it's to me, it's the perfect challenge right now to take advantage of China's growing box office and the sophistication of the audiences and their hunger for all kinds. I just like taking the best from both worlds. I think they're perfect bed mates right now because Hollywood is very, very skilled at certain things that China needs: screenwriting, story structure, certain production management, and character development. A lot of things that Hollywood's really good at, and then not to mention things like visual effects and certain post-production. But I think China has tons of great stories and great crews and locations, and I think Hollywood needs some fresh ideas, and I feel that it's a time, again, where Chinese audiences clearly love American movies, but also clearly love good Chinese movies. So why not make films that, to me, Shanghai Calling represents in a way? It feels like an American movie. It's the production values and the pacing and all that is meant to feel more like an American movie, but it has Chinese content. And so this was an experiment, and it's emboldened me to at least believe that it is possible to draw audiences from both sides of the Pacific together.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Presumably you have a better lawyer than Sam, a more competent attorney to take care of those sorts of issues. If you were making this film, same general story, for a Chinese audience, exclusively for a Chinese audience, in what ways would it be different?
It's a really good question. I think, first of all, Sam may end up with the Chinese girl. And whether or not he'd be the lead character, maybe it would be about Gengle, Awesome Wang, or something. I think it was really for a Chinese audience. I think you want Chinese in the lead roles, so it's not an outsider looking into China. They can appreciate the movie, but it's still slightly marginalized because of that. It would be the same, I think, if we were making a film purely for an American audience with Chinese. If you showed Chinese in the lead roles, would it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think people like to identify with their lead characters.
Yeah, I'm curious. The movie was a really great sort of visual Valentine to Shanghai. I mean, you really captured the city really beautifully, and I love the montage of like the luxury brands that you see on the marquees. Something I was struck by in Shanghai though is that you don't see like multiplexes or big cinematic showcase places like TCL Chinese Theater, for example. Can you talk about how it is that Chinese movie consumers consume that media and are marketed to? Because it feels like it's really different there.
Actually, there are lots of multiplexes now. Where we had our, what screening did we have there? We had one major screening at Xintiandi. Do you know that big plaza? And they have a huge multiplex upstairs. And there are more and more, and they're digitized and they're very modern. So number one, yes, there are multiple screens now, multiplexes for sure. And number two, I think the marketing is not that different. They use big billboards, they have posters, there's a lot of social media, advertisements, TV commercials, very similar in a lot of ways. And that's probably not a coincidence because they really study how we do it here. And they sell stars, that's always a big one. They do big press conferences and red carpets, and you'll see these entertainment shows where stars are being interviewed, and it's really quite similar in a lot of ways. I'm trying to think if I can think of any differences. Probably just that sometimes those press conferences are a little odd, like they'll do little skits, like when they did ours for Shanghai Calling. It was a bit of a surprise for us. They decided to do a little skit at the beginning. Okay, but, you know, there might
What
be
was
some.
the skit about?
It was kind of hard to, I don't know, they had a bunch, you know, they like to perform. It was like a performance. It was like a dance, a song and dance thing, really. And so there's performances. Here's a difference. They pay their journalists. Yikes. They pay journalists to show up at press conferences. That would be considered kind of a no-no here, wouldn't it? Like, you don't really.
Journalists would make a lot more money.
Yeah, they would. But apparently they won't come unless you pay them. Red envelope. So, and you know, so that, yeah, that kind of bothered me a little bit, but that's how it's done. I mean, it's just a given that that's what they do.
On the Constitution. Yeah, it is on the Constitution.
I love the acting. I thought it was great. I have 2 questions. How many hours a day did you shoot for those 30 days? And whose idea was it to have that flute player in the bicycle cutting back and forth to him? That was superb.
Technically, we could have shot 24 hours a day because there's no unions in China. Some of us get tired.
Yeah.
They also, Chinese films shoot 7 days a week often. They don't take a break. It's crazy.
Wow.
So but because we had SAG actors, we had to abide by SAG rules. And thank God for that. So they had their regular 12-hour turnaround, and that was actually one of the most challenging things. I should have thought of this sooner. Probably the most challenging thing was to remind our ADs who were doing the scheduling that you can't call the actors at 6 in the morning and have them sit around for 6 hours doing nothing. Because in Chinese films, it doesn't matter. Nobody's keeping track. There isn't, you know, this sort of stringent minute by minute tallying of time. And that was really hard. So mixing SAG rules with Chinese production, that was like oil and water, because they just will go on forever. So we shot 30 days, 6 days a week, and more or less. And our hours we couldn't go on that long, and also we had an American DP, so we had to be respectful of his time. What was your other question?
The flute.
Nathan Flutebox was someone that Daniel Shah, his name was literally Nathan Flutebox. Daniel Shah saw him on a YouTube video performing at a Google conference. Google had hired him from London to perform, because he does this bebop playing. Now here's the irony. We flew him out from London. He performed one day. He did all this stuff. We got him to record extra stuff. And then in the editing, our composer convinced us that for that scene, we should have something bigger. Because what it was before was just single flute. And Nathan Flutebox didn't have time to do any more recording of anything else, so we actually put that in digitally afterwards. Sorry.
I loved it. I thought it was
Yeah,
good.
but we thought it still really worked, and he really was there, and he really did play, and he's really phenomenal.
You want to talk about? Oh, there.
Was Awesome Wong always that much of a character, that little of a character in the story? Because he was actually my favorite character.
Oh, really? Did you want more of him?
I want more. I want to see the adventures of Awesome Wong.
I wish, sorry, I will put my mic.
What's my bad? I wish I had brought you our t-shirt, but if you go on our website, you can buy one. It says, "I am Awesome Wong." A black t-shirt, white lettering. You would love it. www.shanghaiCalling.com. And Gongla is an amazing actor. I love him too. I think he's an amazing actor. I thought he was incredible, both playing this for us, you know, the fantasy awesome and the real awesome. And I'm glad you liked him. He was great. He was always the sort of the bookends of the movie, and was he more or less, not in the shooting, but in the writing of the script, he was actually based on, according to Daniel, a British private detective in China. And one of the first things that we did, because I told him this, and then it was repeated by many people in China, is we need more Chinese characters. If this is going to be a co-production, we need more, you know, you need to beef up the Chinese characters more. So that was, he got switched to a Chinese character. So yes, more.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of Asian American actors have to go overseas to find roles. Do you think that that's because in America we don't have a lot of Asian American writers, Asian American producers, or do you think, I was just wondering if you thought that it's more of a larger issue with American audiences wouldn't accept an Asian American as the lead here?
Well, all those things are related. There are not enough good stories, perhaps, writers that are writing the stories, but there's also not enough inspiration to write and make those stories because American audiences are generally provincial and don't care enough about other cultures. And that's just a fact. So subtitled movies and movies, you know, there's a reason that really the only Chinese movies that have done well here are martial arts movies. And Toilet Club, I guess, was an exception, but you know, the rare exception. So then people probably get discouraged, say, why should I bother? I do see a growing number of Asian American filmmakers who say, screw it, I'll just make films for the Asian American audience. To me, that's not as satisfying, but I really respect people who make those choices. So it's difficult, you know, it is really difficult, but I think it's changing, and I think it's changing in some part because of the growing interest in China, and that's changing because of China's growth. So a lot of it does come down to economics, but I like to think there's a whole other cultural you know, aspect to it that is either, it's hard to know whether it's a cause or effect, but it is in the mix.
Okay, last question. One last question.
Yes. Do you think China is interested in Chinese American stories? Since we've been here about 150 years, there must be lots of story about Wild West and stuff like that.
I think they are to some degree. At one time, there was I was talking to a Chinese television station about doing the building of the railroad story, and you know, showing families in China and here and there, and they seemed very enthusiastic at the time, and for some reason they dropped it, and I hear about it, you know, I belong to this organization called the Committee of 100, which is a lot of leaders in various fields in the Chinese American community, and they're always so enamored of this person or that person who's been successful, but I'm not sure. I think generally China is very obsessed with big and mainstream these days and brand, so it's harder sometimes to get underneath to a more nuanced place, and I think the Chinese American experience is more nuanced, you know, in their eyes. We're not necessarily the biggest, loudest thing going on in America. Yes and no. Yes and no, I would say.
I think that's all the time we have, but even though Daniel, Sean, and Daniel Hennig couldn't be here, I invite you guys to check out Asia Pacific Arts, which is the website that I edit, and we have interviews with them where they talk about, you know, being Asian American filmmakers or Asian American actors, and they talk about kind of how some of the stories in the film were inspired by their real life stories, you know, as an expat in Shanghai. So please join me in thanking Janet for